Stanford University.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm actually really pleased to be here myself. This is one of the kind of talks that, that I find over the years, we just had 3 great talks, and there are talks that, you really feel compelled to give. There are talks that you're supposed to give, and there are talks that you really like to give. And this talk has all 3 components in it for me. I'm an environmental scientist. I started out with a bias towards looking at wastewater treatment and solid waste treatment, and worked back at Rutgers on the East Coast. And during my tenure there, we started working with NASA on regenerative life support systems, and it actually really changed the way I looked at environmental science dramatically. It was a dramatic break in how I used to think about environmental science. And as we go through this presentation, I think you'll understand why I'm saying that. I'm going to talk today about advanced life support systems. And can anybody here point out where an advanced life support system might be on this chart? Say. Earth's good one. Any other ones?
ISS.
Okay, ISS. Any other ones? Yeah, maybe, but we don't know how that plays into it. How about this fella? Okay. How about all this dark stuff? Imagine if it wasn't vacuum. Imagine if it was like atmosphere. The sun would never hit us, right? I mean, it would be blocked away. So there's lots of things that happen in this system here, and I'm going to talk a lot about Earth right now, because when you try to leave Earth, what do you need to do? You need to bring at least part of it with us, right? I mean, this is a little bit of Earth, but you need to bring the processes of Earth with you. If you don't do that, you can't leave Earth, and it's a quite interesting way to actually learn about Earth and life support. So let's move on. So I'm going to talk about 3 different aspects today, and not necessarily sequentially. This is all sort of mixed up a little bit. Human and Earth life support systems, and then I'll talk a lot about space life support systems, and then how we can look at mixing those 2 aspects and integrating human and Earth life support systems, a way to think about sustainability, and to look at what NASA has done and space exploration in general as a way of potentially helping integrate those systems. If you have any questions while I'm going along, please feel free to just stop me and ask me. Okay. First, when we talk about life support, we want to know about what is a life system. It's going to help us understand what we're actually trying to do. So, life systems are a diverse collection of individual components and organs performing separate and complementary functions. So, when you look at a human, it might not be so evident, but if you look a little deeper, you get to see that there's quite a bit going on in there. There's a lot of organs, nerves, veins, muscles, tissue, skeletal system, all working in concert to make a life system. You take out any one of those parts, and there's a good chance that you're either going to be highly diminished or dead. These systems are self-assembling, they're self-repairing, and they're self-regulating. A lot of our system is all about how to replicate itself, how to regulate itself, and to repair itself. It's subject to entropy, which, if you're not familiar with entropy, if you ever had to deal with a 7-year-old boy, you could just put entropy on the shirt. It's this destructive force. So there's always something that's trying to tear you down, and so you have to use energy, and we get it mostly from the sun, to fight entropy, actually, to work those systems together. And all life requires a supporting environment. So when we can, we tend to think of life systems as organisms that we know about, but when you look at the Earth in general as an overall system, you'll find that it does follow all of these same aspects here. To call it an organism as a whole is debatable. People have tried to do that, but it's an interesting concept that together these systems work. They are self-repairing, they're self-assembling, they self-regulate, and they actually require a supporting environment as well. So if you want to leave Earth and you want to, if you want to know what makes Earth tick, actually. You know, just try to leave Earth. Then you understand what's, at least partially, what's going on Earth. So if you want to jump in a suit and jump out into where we don't have atmosphere anymore, but at least we have some level of gravity that makes us not fly completely away, you realize that you need to create a system that will give you the right pressure. It'll deliver water, food, air, moderate the temperature, give you radiation protection, of which this gives you very little radiation protection, waste removal, and provide gravity if you're going to be there for any long period of time. These are all things that we need to do and include in a suit like this that normally this big blue thing down below does for us. So what are Earth life support systems? And if you take something away from this talk, this is one of the major themes that I would like you to get. First, I like to think of this in two different segments. One we call the bones. I'll call them the bones. This is the physical resources. This is the whole mass of the Earth itself, including that thin little film on the outside, which we call the biosphere, where we have a lot of resource diversity and recycling and distribution and cycling. There's an awful lot going on under the surface all the time that is moving material everywhere. If anybody's so number one, is there anybody here who works with life support systems? No? Okay. So if you're a geologist, you begin to understand what these different life support systems are. Radiation protection. So as we just saw by David's talk, the sun is out there, and if we don't have something protecting us, we would be toast pretty quickly. So on one level, we have an iron-nickel core, which creates a magnetic field and shields us from a lot of the radiation of the sun. There's other kinds of protection. There's a stable, there's a proper gravitational field. If it was too small or too light, life couldn't exist. So the Earth is pretty much the right size, the right mass. We have the stable rotation. And so that's where the moon came in. There's a lot of theories. I don't know if you've heard about this, but theories of a large impactor hitting the Earth, and it formed a moon eventually. And that moon actually stabilized our rotation on the axis such that it allowed the seasons to be moderate enough to allow life to occur on Earth. So thank you, moon. But the moon also drives the tides, of course. And that drives an awful lot of biological productivity and what happens here on the Earth. The proper, proper solar radiation levels. If we were too far or too close to the sun, we'd be in trouble there as well as a proper atmospheric pressure. There's also, if those are the bones, these are the organs, the tissue, the flesh of the system. These are Earth's ecosystem services. And this is a new term. Has anybody heard the word ecosystem services? Great, wow. Okay, when I started in environmental science, this term was just not out there. Even when I left 6 years ago, this term was really not out there. So
Stanford, I think they're required to do it.
yeah. So other countries, yes. America's a little slow. We're getting there. So these are different systems, biologically driven systems that are in concert with the bones and recycled systems that are creating and self-regulating the overall system. So we have tremendous amount of water purification, air purification, and radiation protection by the atmosphere. The atmosphere acts like about 10 feet of concrete. The soil formation and fertility always going on. Climate control on many different levels. Food and fiber production, nutrient cycling, thermal control, waste decomposition, and disease and pest control. These are just some of the major ecosystem functions that exist and are working 24/7 to keep us alive, working highly integrated, so integrated we don't really even quite understand. As a society, as a species, we don't quite really fully understand what these ecosystem services are completely, how they work, how they interact, how fragile they are, how they can be affected by various alterations in the sun, in how anthropogenically, how we change them. There's a lot of research to understand how these things start to work with each other. And they're all made up and conducted by individual components, individual players. So we have a tree. So if we could, if we had a handbook like baseball cards, so what does a tree do? It's a food source. It purifies water, it produces oxygen, CO2 sequestration and regulation, climate control, on and on. Birds, many different functions. Bacteria, of course, The list goes on and on and on. So these are tremendously important integrated life support functions that individually all the different organisms and systems on Earth are working together to form this really interesting and beautiful conglomerate. So as a corollary and as a juxtaposition, I also want to talk about human life support systems. So if you go on the internet and you Google life support, for the most part, what do you think you're going to get? Anybody? Hospitals, medical, right? Very good, thank you. So, you know, we have dialysis machines, pacemakers, all kinds of ICU equipment, incubators for newborns, many different kinds of life support equipment. And this is stuff that augments organ function or some function in a human to keep them alive. Okay? But this is not what I'm really talking about in terms of human life support systems. These are very important, but there's major ones that we do. So agriculture, how do we produce our food from the seas, from the land? Water treatment, waste treatment, power production, transportation of goods and people. We have commerce, the economy and how we monitor it, industry, building shelter, communications of all different sorts, and laws and governance. Imagine law without it. Emergency services of all different types, defense, and what we're doing right here, education, and possibly religion, possibly space exploration in itself could be part of a life support system. So these systems all come together. These are all systems that we build on top of the Earth life support systems. They in of themselves won't keep us alive. We have no way to purify the air of the world. We have no way to control temperature. We have no way to purify all the water. The natural systems are doing that. We do these to augment our own little systems, to augment ourselves. A lot of amazing things that have happened with these systems, but the question comes when we integrate these systems with Earth life support systems, what actually happens? Okay, how well suited are we? And you know, a bird builds a nest, it's very well suited to its environment. How well are our systems suited to the Earth's life support systems? One of the things that you can notice here is that the human population really changed when our life support systems change. And notice what happens in the background very soon here. Okay, we were at essentially from time immemorial until recently limited by many different things. Now, what are some ideas what caused this population increase so dramatic so quickly? Food production. How did food production all of a sudden become so big?
I mean, increased efficiencies in agriculture, newer technologies, knowledge about the development and crops.
Okay, there was a certain aspect that made farming big. Well, we've been settled for quite a while. So, but what's that? Well, power. Okay, how do we harness power to do agriculture? Tractors, you know. So we got oil, right? Somebody found oil, somebody found wood. We made machines that actually took that energy and turned it into mechanical power, right? As soon as we did that, then we changed agriculture from people with horses to giant tractors, and that became big. We got electricity, and look how electricity changed the world. Look how transportation has changed the world. Now we can move goods where we could never move them before. We can manufacture goods like we could never make them before. All of a sudden, medicine becomes, you know, a much greater factor in all of this. So there's a tremendous amount of change that occurred when we found more power, and then that sort of trickled up up here. This is from the UN population data. You know, I'm sure many of you have seen, you know, a graph like this, and they normally, you know, bring it out to here and show, you know, where it tops out. They don't show the opposite side of this graph and what happens on the other side of the graph. Nobody knows, but there's lots of different predictions, and a lot of them aren't that pretty. When it tends to go down quickly, there's a reason and it's not going to be fun. So the idea is how do we make our systems so that this doesn't happen? This is evidence of power, and I mean electrical power. So you get an idea. It's hard to tell necessarily looking at Earth photographs from space, but if you look at night, you can tell that we're actually having a major influence on the system. So integrating the human and Earth life support systems, all right, how do we do that? This is a very big question. I like this. A professor at British Columbia has said this is not rocket science. It's much more complicated than that, and it really, really is much more complicated than that. However, and I want to now focus on what I think we can learn from NASA and from space exploration, even astrobiology. Okay, so we have several different roles that we play in this. Number one, we have a lot of monitoring systems that circle the Earth that are always looking at different aspects of the Earth, and I'll go into this very briefly. Just as a government institute, we try to be, good citizens. We're building green buildings. We're building one at Ames right now. Will be the greenest government building in the nation. We're trying to use NASA technologies that we developed internally to help it be a learning building. It's going to be quite interesting. But also is exploring, moving out, looking at the Earth from far out, looking at other planets, looking at astrobiology findings. Where do we come from? Why is Mars, which was once looked very much like this, blue and warm, why is it red and dusty now? Is that going to happen to us, and why and how? Where did life come from? Very interesting questions. It could be quite relevant. So I'm just going to quickly, this is not my field, but I just wanted to point out that the Earth Sciences Division has many different missions on orbit right now that are looking at many different aspects of the Earth. We study and send more information to the Earth than people know what to do with, actually. It's so much data. There's different ways of monitoring what the weather is like. You can just either take pictures or you can do simulations. This Landsat 7 is a really important satellite, and it's been looking at many different things, including looking at the coral reef mapping. A lot of coral reefs are dying. They're trying to map those. Understanding water balances over entire continents, very important in climate change aspects. We've been monitoring the ozone hole for a long time and understanding what's going on with that. And a lot of these data are used for many different types of prediction, ecological modeling, climate modeling, trying to integrate ecological and climate models together to try to have predictive capacity so that we can start to understand what might actually happen. Very difficult. This is a really new science. Requires large amounts of supercomputers, which we have over at Ames, to actually do the computations. It's quite an interesting field of endeavor. Well, there's actually researchers also looking at famine prediction. There's one that was looking at, in Africa, looking at satellite data and trying to understand when plants are actually in stress mode. They can predict we will have a famine, and so you can tell the leaders of the area, you're going to have a famine. Start preparations now, whatever you need to do now to be ready for when that famine hits. These are quite important, especially as the dynamics of the Earth are changing. So now I want to talk about human space exploration. So now I get into some nitty-gritty about what we actually do in life support systems for space. This is Ed White, the first spacewalk where he was on a tether. This is the Gemini mission, and actually, I don't know how many people know, but this was the dicey time. He went out, and they didn't necessarily think of everything they needed to know about in terms of handholds and whatnot, and it was very difficult for him to get back in. He had liters of sweat built up in his system and in his boots. They were close to cutting the cord. But he made it back in, and the doctors were quite concerned because he was struggling like crazy to get back in. So it looks nice and serene right now, but that was actually a very harrowing scene that it all worked out okay, but it is not so easy. The Mercury missions were the first. You see, that's Alan Shepard being squeezed into a small can. They shot him up just high enough to get into orbit, then he came back down just to see if that would be okay. They then went on and shot John Glenn and orbited the Earth. The Gemini program was the next step. It bridged the Mercury program with the Apollo program, and it was where they could try to figure out, can we send humans into space for a couple of weeks and will they live? And so you can see how small that little capsule is, and they had two people squeezed together like in a bathtub together, sitting there for 2 weeks. And if you can imagine you two sitting together there for the next 2 weeks, no place to go, staring out into space and just sitting there for 2 weeks. And I saw the astronauts talked about this for quite a while, and they said this was the worst experience they've ever had in their life. They wanted to kill each other. They really just, really truly wanted to kill each other. And you can imagine, some of the bodily functions that you have to do with a suit on. It's not pleasant by yourself, much less pleasant when you're next to somebody else who doesn't want to see it. And that was just, so very unsung heroes. They just did that to understand, can we get to Apollo? And so this is where, we have all the celebrated heroes who, the major and the goal of Apollo was to get to the moon and come back safely and bring back geological samples. And I'm sure, even though most of you probably weren't born at that time, this is over 40 years ago without computers that we have today. It was quite an amazing feat, and nobody has done it yet since. After Apollo, we had Skylab, which was essentially the first big Skylab, laboratory in the sky. And life support systems, let me take a step back. In these systems here, life support was very rudimentary. You brought up oxygen, brought up water, brought up food. You really didn't do very much. There was no recycling of materials. And that remains true for most of the missions up until ISS, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit of detail. Skylab was a method to bring people up and let them stay in space for a long period of time, to do experiments in space and see what the effect of space was on humans for prolonged durations. This large fuel tank ended up being their waste can, and they took all of the waste they had and put it through this airlock, and it eventually filled up this can. That can actually got blocked one time, and it almost ended all the missions because they couldn't throw their trash away. Something as small as that. And these systems here, they brought up all the water they needed and they ejected it. They stored their garbage here. It eventually burned up when the whole system came in. They had a toilet at this point. Back here, you notice there were no toilets. So there was interesting systems to handle that. This was much more civil. They had actually a shower, which they tried, didn't really like that much. They had toilets. Then we had quite a while between that period and when shuttle came about, and the shuttle is pretty much an open loop system as well. So the resources that we use for air, water, and waste, pretty much the same thing. We bring up what we need and we store the wastes, or we eject. Some of the liquids get ejected from shuttle. Shuttle has, I think, four more shots, and then it'll be officially retired. International Space Station, which is, you can see it. I've actually seen it circling the Earth at particular times. You can actually get on a website and find out when it's going to be overhead, and if you ever care to see it, it'll be this kind of white light that's moving pretty quickly across the sky. The space station is the most sophisticated life support system that we have at this point in time. And let me, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about this space station later in greater detail, so I'll just leave it at that for the moment. We have had designs, and they come in waves of going to the moon and onto Mars, and creating long duration missions. So this is a lot different So when you're in ISS and you are circulating around the world, you're still in lower Earth orbit, and you can get supplies pretty readily through shuttle, or right now the Russians systems we're bringing up supplies. So those systems are readily resupplied, and you can bring up water, food, bring back wastes. It's not so difficult. When you go to Mars, depending, the past thoughts on this is about a 6-month travel time to get to Mars. You'll end up being on the surface for close to 2 years and another 6 or 7 months coming back. So it's a long period of time. It's really difficult to bring all the water, all the food, all of the air that you would need to bring, and just discharge it when you're done. So obviously, it makes sense to recycle as much as you can, as much as makes economic sense. So we are trying to develop, so the branch that I'm in exploration life support, we develop systems that are regenerative. In other words, they're trying to recycle nearly everything that becomes a waste, then comes around, then becomes a resource again. When you think about space exploration, research, and technology development, there really isn't anything, there's very few things that NASA doesn't research. And I think this is a very unique capability and function of NASA as compared to any other government agency or any other agency that I know about. We are trying to take people and put them on a different solar body, different planet. So all the things that you would need around here, we need to bring up for the most part. So power systems, air, water, waste, how to produce food, food processing in space, thermal control, how to make the structures, transportation, both getting there and back, as well as buggies on the moon, how to use the in situ resources, what's there on the surface that you can use, how to monitor, control the communication systems that we just saw about. All these systems we need to develop and use for space travel. And they end up being, because it costs about $10,000 a kilogram to shoot something up into space, even to low Earth orbit, we want to save as much money as we can, so it becomes very low mass, low volume, and low power consumption. So these become really important when we start to think about transitioning our systems here on Earth to those kinds of aspects, to use less resources, to use less power, make them smaller, miniature, very robust, reliable. They last a long time. The rovers that have been on Mars and running around every day for the past 6 years, I mean, imagine driving your car every day for 6 years and not stopping for a pit stop. So these are systems that are incredibly robust and strong. The last bullet here, systems integration, modeling, and analysis, is a really important aspect of all of this. If you try to build if you try to do any kind of mission, build a spacecraft, imagine saying to different people, okay, you build the engine, you build the habitation unit, you build the communication system, but don't talk to each other. And we're not going to really tell you what the requirements are or anything like that. Just, go do that. Obviously, the system will never come together. So you need to really focus and to develop what you need from your mission, what the requirements are, and then start to design it. And this is I don't expect you to be able to read this, but this is from a reference missions document. This is a particular mission. It doesn't really matter which one it is, but we break it up into biomass production, thermal control, food, air, water, waste, human accommodations, and extravehicular activity support. So, and then we see all the lines that connect these different aspects together, and they have to be incredibly well integrated. I mean, imagine a room much smaller than this, taking 6 people and living there for years, and having the systems just continually work every day, very reliably, and not build up molecules that are toxic, not build up molecules that are somehow damaging your hardware somewhere. You're not releasing stuff outside of you're not ejecting things that are messing with the outside of your system. All these things need to be thought about with great detail and care internally. So there's a lot of communication, a lot of systems engineering, program management that goes into understanding something as complex as putting over 2 million pieces, different systems, together in Apollo to make it work every time it goes up. 2 million different pieces. Imagine the nightmare of doing that paperwork. We also, take that integration, we do that theoretically on paper and with computers. We can model those sorts of aspects, but then we actually have to build it and test it here before we would ever try to do it in space. It's not going to work here under good conditions where you can walk out. We're not going to try it in space. Okay? So we have an awful lot of testing, risk management aspects that are conducted, pulling these systems together and make sure that they actually work. It takes quite a while to take a piece of hardware and what they call flight qualify it. If you want to make sure that from its inception, you say, hey, let's make this. From the time you say that to the time it actually gets integrated onto a spacecraft, it can often be 10 years because of all of the different aspects of making sure that it's not going to harm the other systems and it's going to work in an integrated way. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about ISS, to give you just a little more details on what actually is happening here, why this is more advanced than our previous systems. And of course, the I in ISS is international. So there's many different countries and organizations that are up here working together. That's how we could afford to build such a large unit, and it also brings different countries together and learning experiences for all of us to learn from each other. These are the principal life support hardware distribution schematic, and as I know you can't read these probably from there, maybe you can, but you can see all these little red blocks, blue blocks, green blocks. These are different life support functions that are happening at various places within the overall station. And the station's pretty big. So you can't just over here put the CO2 absorbing machine and the water purification machine. It won't be able to satisfy the whole system. So there are many different places, and they're all strategically put in ways to make sure that they're safe and that they're efficient. And let me go a little bit more into why we want to regenerate, why regenerative systems are really important, and why we're doing this on ISS. So we have on the left-hand side over there the daily inputs to an astronaut, to an average crew person, and then the daily outputs. And they the totals end up being the same. There's a law of conservation of mass here. You can see that the top 5 there are oxygen, food solids, water in the food, food prep and water, and drink, add up to about 5 kilograms per person per day. And that's about $50,000 of launch cost per person per day, just to supply that. Then if we go a little bit further and we start to add some of the amenities for longer duration, this is hygiene water, shower water, clothes washing instead of bringing up clothes and then you wear them a couple of times, you throw them away. Dishwash water and flush water for the urinal starts to add up. And then that could bring it up to 30 kilograms per person per day, which starts to get quite expensive. And when you start to put this all together, it becomes 11, on the high side it becomes 11 metric tons per person per year. That's a lot of uploading. That is very costly, and just to use those systems, use those materials and then throw them away, way too expensive. So the idea here is whatever we can, whatever makes most economic sense, to actually take water, clean it, bring it back to usable standards. And so the cost of that will be the machine. So if you have a water treatment machine that takes up this much, and you have this many metric tons of mass per person per year, as long as overall the mass of the machine is going to be less than what you would normally spend, that's called the break-even point, what that time would be. As long as the mission is longer than that, it's going to be fruitful for us to move forward and do regeneration. So on station right now, this is the current baseline, and we are working actually to improve this. You can see the crew in the middle. We have urine recovery. It didn't used to be that way, but now we have a system that actually converts urine back into hygiene water. The cabin air goes to temperature, humidity, and control on the top, and comes back. We have to remove the CO2, just like here on Earth. The plants are doing it all the time. Right now we vent the CO2 after we capture it, but we are working on systems to recover that CO2 and knock that carbon off and bring back oxygen from that. So we don't have to bring up as much oxygen. Here is taking from the water down below, that's water processing, that has been cleaned from various sources. I'll get into this. We can actually split the water, which is H2O. We can split it and make H2 and O2. So we can get oxygen off that system, and we can get extra hydrogen, which I'll tell you we can use later. And right now the waste management is quite simple. It just goes off and stored. So we do have actually two major, so the air and the water systems are now regenerative systems. And we're working on actually adding more for the air. So a little detail on what these technologies are. For the water loop, in other words, closing the water loop, we're trying to, when we say close the loop, we mean to try to, whatever water we use, we bring back. So the water becomes a loop, becomes dirty, clean, dirty, clean. And we have drinkable water recycling, and there's many different, so what you'll see is that the italics are what we actually use in space station. So for potable water recycling, we have multifiltration and Sabatier, which is going to be coming in soon. For the hygiene water, the stuff that you would use to wash your face, we use multifiltration systems. And the urine recycling, we have the new system, which is the vapor compression distillation system. So the multifiltration, so taking hygiene water and turning it back into drinkable water, we have a multifiltration system, which is, has 6 different beds, and it has a filter in it for particulates, as well as adsorbents for particulates and for inorganics. So it's purely a filtration system. When those cartridges are spent, we need to replace them out. So it's something that uses its consumables. But overall, it saves mass, so we're using those. The Sabatier reactor, which is not really a water reactor, it is actually the reactor we're trying to recover carbon dioxide with, actually produces water. So if you can read this, it's carbon dioxide plus 4 hydrogens equals water plus methane plus heat. So we take carbon dioxide, we can add hydrogen, and when we pass it over a ruthenium crystal, we can actually, at high temperatures, we can split the carbon off, make methane out of it, we can vent that, or use it actually for propulsion, and then make water. From that water, we could also split the water and get oxygen if we wanted to. The hygiene wastewater, we bring back and turn it back into hygiene product water. So we essentially make hygiene water back into hygiene water again, use water. And that's another kind of multifiltration bed. It's run a little bit differently. It's run, the first bed is the one that gets most of the junk, and it gets clogged quickly, and that one gets removed pretty quickly, and then the other, you move the 5 up and then put a new one in the back. So these systems are also pasteurized and heated to avoid microbial growth, and like I said, they maintain, that's approximately every 15 days. For the urine, that's very difficult. Urine is quite a difficult thing to treat by itself. When you, normally in a sewage treatment plant, when it's mixed in with so much water, it's not as difficult. But when you have it as is, there's a lot of nitrogen in it, a lot of salts in it. It's quite difficult to treat on its own. And the system that we have and have put up on station is the vapor compression distillation system. And without getting too much into the details, the idea behind it is to recover, is to create water vapor, compress it, and be able to use the condensation side and the heating side together as a heat transfer system, a heat exchange system, so that whatever, the only energy that we need to use to clean the water is to actually compress the water vapor and to turn the system. The heating and the cooling are actually done by each other once you start it up. So it's a pretty efficient system. Why do we want to treat the urine? I mean, this is a relatively small amount, right? But it isn't. You can see this is actually Carl Waltz, who was an old director of our whole system. He used to be an astronaut. You can see next to these cans would end up getting filled up with urine and collected and stored. So we started collecting a lot of these on station. So to be able to find a way to not have that happen is quite important. And so this is the newly built and implemented water recovery system that's up on station now. And it incorporates the vapor compression distillation and the different multifiltration beds, all the different systems. So the humidity and condensate water. So right now we're forming, by being in this room, we're forming from the respiration, the water in our breath, we're adding humidity. If we closed off this room, it would start to sweat. The room would get wet and it would dribble. So they're constantly taking the water out of that air. That's pretty clean air, pretty clean water. So that goes directly and becomes drinkable water again. The hygiene water and the urine are treated separately and become different kinds of water. So some interesting issues, not easy. The system is not easy. It's had a couple of issues and are still being rectified. Closing the air loop. So if we were in this room and blocked off all the air vents, what would happen? Anybody? So should I do that? I mean, I got some duct tape here and I can do this. Why shouldn't I? What's gonna happen in this room before too long? You've seen all the old caving movies, the people trapped in the mine. What happens? Everybody falls asleep, right? Okay. So obviously the CO2 starts to build up, the carbon dioxide starts to build up in the system long before you run out of oxygen. And it'll start to build up into toxic levels and you will die from that. So we need to, a couple different things. So normally CO2, we produce a lot, during the day. It's not quite 1-to-1 ratio with the oxygen to CO2, but it's close, 0.85. So we produce a lot of CO2 and it would build up pretty quickly, especially the smaller the capsule. So we need systems that constantly pull out the carbon dioxide. And to close that, we need to take the oxygen that's in that CO2 and then bring it back as oxygen again. So we have several different systems. We have to create the oxygen, we have to remove the CO2, and then we have to do what we call carbon dioxide reduction, which is bringing it back to oxygen. And there are many different technologies, and I'll go through the ones that we're actually using on station. For oxygen production, we could take hygiene water, which you saw previously being produced, and we run it through a static feed water electrolysis system. And what this system does is it creates water vapor, passes it through a membrane. There's an electrode cell that we apply a current through. It splits the hydrogen in the water. They get separated, and we have oxygen and hydrogen. That hydrogen we can actually vent, or we can use it for the Sabatier reactor, which we hope to use up there. So this is a pretty sturdy system. We go about it in different ways. There's Carl again with the Russian system on station, and you see the United States oxygen generation system on the right-hand side over here. So for CO2 removal, we take air and just pass it through what is called a molecular sieve. And in order to do this, we first have to dehumidify the air completely. Carbon dioxide will absorb into this sieve, but so does water, and they compete for the sites. So we have to get the water out first. We get it down to a very, very, very dry state, and then pass the CO2 through the sorbent. And we do this by using what is called a 4-bed molecular sieve. And there's 4 beds, there's 2 dehydrators, and there's 2 CO2 capture systems. And while one is treating the air, the other one is desorbing what was captured on it. So the water that gets trapped on one system and the CO2 that gets trapped on the one system, we're heating those up and bringing the water back into the cabin, and CO2 we're shooting out into space right now while the other one's working. Then they swing back and forth, and so they're able to keep the air clean at all times. And they can run at different rates. If you're exercising, obviously you're producing a lot more CO2. So there are CO2 fluxes that you'll notice on station. And here's the overall strategy, which we start with. When we have air tanks, you breathe, you produce CO2, it goes through the 4-bed molecular sieve, it pulls out the CO2. The CO2 goes to the Sabatier reactor, which we don't have yet, but we will. We can produce water. We can then drink that water. It's very clean. We have hygiene water that we're creating oxygen with, and down below we're supplying nitrogen, which is about 79% of the air that you have in this room, because it leaks. There's a slow leakage rate from the whole system, and we just resupply it.
Yes.
Why couldn't you use plants for CO2 to oxygen?
Ah.
I mean, is it just too much water and too many nutrients required?
Where's my money? Okay. Uh, we'll get to that. Good question. We'll get to that. Food systems, and I'm just going to sort of breeze through this. Food systems is really nothing to write home about. We bring up all the food. This is a typical meal from the shuttle. And working in microgravity, has anybody been in simulated microgravity? Other, in your sleep maybe? Anything? No? Okay. All right. I had the mixed fortune of having to do experiments on what they call the vomit comet, the C9, and where you do these parabolas, and once you hit about 50 in a row, you're glad you took the medicine, let me tell you. And when you're in microgravity, it's interesting. Things that you normally take for granted, they're just not there. And you can end up floating and just trying to grab for things if you're not careful. And that includes anything that you're going to try to eat or drink. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of the crew eating. They're throwing food at each other, and or the Homer Simpson episode. So in the way that they package them, they have to package them so they're pretty much ready to eat. There's hot water. There's no microwave, so you can rehydrate things. But anybody who's been camping knows eating rehydrated food all the time can get a little tiresome. So they often send up pretty much ready to eat foods that you cut open and eat. Waste management, which is one of the areas that I work strongly in. Right now, there's very little in the way of waste management. You can see this is the compactor, the waste compactor we have. And that waste right now is essentially wrapped up, stored into various bags and vessels, and just kept until it can either go down in the Russian Progress vehicle or shuttle. So it's keeping the trash in this room with you, as you live in the room, which you can understand why there would be some issues with that. So we're looking at, and it tends to build up. So I'm not going to say all of this is trash, but all of this becomes material that needs to be managed in some way. And some of it is rather benign, and some of it is not. Some of it is food waste. Some of it is human waste. Sorry, I don't have pictures of the toilet on here. The toilet is an interesting. The toilet is an interesting venture. Again, imagine trying to take a toilet and put it on the ceiling and make it work. Okay, so you need airflow. Otherwise, things don't go anywhere. Okay, so you need to provide airflow to pull different materials into various areas and keep them there. And so what we end up with the system that we have now, we have in the shuttle there's a tank, and it keeps it there, and then they empty it after 17 days. But in space station, that wouldn't work, so we have metal tanks that actually get changed in and out. We're actually using the Russian toilet at this point in time, which uses little bags that are in individual use, disposable. Each time you use it, you throw it down into this can, which you literally go in the can. And we've been looking at part of the experiments that I did, and I elected not to show video of the C9 flight, where we were testing the toilet, how well the toilet would work in space. And to this, we needed to create systems that actually pushed out simulant during non-gravity conditions, which you have 22 seconds to actually push a simulant into a system, into the toilet, see how it works, and then you're back here on all of a sudden in 2G. So we were kind of the hit of the airplane, but the kind of hit that everybody wanted to stay kind of far away from. And they called it because it was a mechanical system, they called it the robot. We had other systems, and we got termed endearingly the poo crew. So we had some interesting times with that. But aside from that, waste management isn't very developed on station or any other system, but we're working on lots of systems to actually bring wastes, compact them with plastic heat melt compaction systems, actually incinerate them, bring them back to carbon dioxide, water, all the individual materials that we would need, plant nutrients. Those again are going to be for long duration emissions, which we now, I want to just move into a little bit. So the question of moving to Mars, moving to systems where you're going to be there for years, developing these long duration missions where resupply is incredibly expensive. I mean, to bring supplies up to low Earth orbit, very expensive. To get out of there, extremely expensive. To bring it into the gravity well of Mars, extremely, extremely expensive. So whatever we have landing, we want it to be as light as possible. And we want to bring it once and use it over and over and over and over again. So the question comes up of what kind of technologies are we planning on using for Mars or long duration missions? And that is not fully developed yet, but so your question is coming into play here. The big question of how do we feed ourselves and how do we do these systems? How do we take carbon dioxide from our breath, condensate water and treat it to potable water? How do we take processed urine and feces and bring it over into food? You know, what one technology will do that? And yeah, so plants do that. But plants are difficult to grow in space and they require a lot of light. And so there's a lot of difficulties in bringing all of the hardware, essentially the greenhouses you need to create enough plants to do this job. So a lot of work has been going on how to grow plants most efficiently, which is interesting for Earth applications as well. Just a really quick, the plant-human symbiosis, which Mark Kliss, who supplied a lot of these slides, he likes to call this sort of somewhat borderline mutually parasitic. But essentially, you know, the autotrophs, the higher plants, are converting light energy into chemical energy. They're moving CO2 from the air. They're transforming carbon dioxide and water into biomass food that we can eat. They produce oxygen. They produce pure water, very clean water. And on the other side, you know, we're the people who are using that. We use that chemical energy. We produce the CO2 that the plants need. We oxidize the food to CO2 and water, which is what they need. We use that oxygen and we use that water and we bring it back. So plants can do an awful lot of this processing. There's a lot associated with that. Just real quickly, you get the idea that all of these wastes that from humans end up back into the biomass production center. So when you eat and normally human waste goes into the sewer and then it gets treated and then the water goes off into a stream into the ocean, solids end up somewhere. We're moving those nutrients, the phosphorus, nitrogen, everything that we've mined from various and sometimes inexhaustible sources somewhere and concentrating it, and it's not getting back to the plants that we need to put it back on. So this system here is actually closing that loop, taking the solids loop and closing that and creating a system that can handle plant growth as well in a regenerable fashion instead of bringing up all the nutrients that we would need to grow plants for years. Here down in Kennedy Space Center, you see some technicians growing plants in the biomass production center that they have down there. This is another smaller unit that they've done a lot of work in. This was actually what they called a salad machine. So one of the ideas is to, before we bring up full-blown, expensive and difficult plant growth units, is to try to build a little machine half the size of this table that we can grow things that would, number one, teach us how to grow plants in space, but number two, make it more psychologically compatible to be in space for a long period of time. To be able to taste a tomato or lettuce or something green. Humans miss that with time. There's a story of the Russians were doing an experiment where they were growing plants and they ended up eating it because it's so much part of our nature to actually want that. So this is different concepts that eventually we'll be moving forward with.
John, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I've seen that picture a lot, but it seems like when you grow grow, for example, a tomato, there's a lot of wasted leaves that are inedible.
Yeah.
Is there a focus on growing things where you can eat most of the plant product?
Yes. So the question is, different plants have different amounts of what they call the harvest yield. So soybeans are quite low. You get a lot of nitrogen and a lot of protein in a little tiny soybean, but there's an awful lot of plant material that is wasted. Tomatoes have decent harvest yield. Potatoes have a great harvest yield. They produce a lot of heavy potatoes for the mass that they produce on top. So a lot of research is looking at how to make plants smaller. So they make dwarf wheat. So when there's people who've been taking a normal wheat plant that evolves in nature to try to outcompete and grow tall, and there's a biological function in nature, but in space we don't need it. We don't want it. We don't want the growth chamber to be this high to grow wheat. We want it to be grow wheat like this. So they're growing wheat this big and producing a lot more fruit per mass wasted. There's other people looking at how to do that even more. Looking at growing just the tomato using chemical systems to actually be able to take the tomato. It's a genetic process, and there's people working on all different aspects of how to do this for different things. And so there is a lot of investigation, number one, on how to make plants smaller and more productive on the fruit, how to make them use, so there's a lot of light that is wasted. You put light on a plant, sun doesn't matter, the plant has plenty of what it needs and it rejects an awful lot. We can just shine a blue light or a red light and reduce the amount that we're wasting on that plant. We can find ways to use LED technology, different ways to water, add nutrients. So there's a lot of work that's making world-class. So we have world-class, world record productions of actual food per area in these systems, and it's highly controlled, and so a lot of those aspects can also be transferred over into growth systems.
Is NASA just looking at cultivating sort of the more typical crops that we would eat on Earth, or would they be willing to look at something like algae or something that maybe is more efficient?
So people have looked at algae, yeah. So spirulina and other aspects of other algae, but not too many, are eaten typically around the world today. You can go to the Whole Foods and buy spirulina drinks. There is a limit on how much you can eat and to produce the proteins. There's a acceptability function by the crew, and there's a protein ratio, an amino acid ratio within there that can start to cause problems like gout if you have too much. So, but people are working on that because algae does a number of things. It produces, it's a plant, right? So it does all, it takes the CO2 and makes water. It makes oxygen, and so people have been looking at that, and because it's a smaller part of an acceptable diet, it hasn't reached the spotlight at this point. But it's a good question. Yeah. So why do you think that there is regolith heaped up on top of these systems? Was it?
Temperature?
It would help a little bit with temperature control, but there's a real major reason. There's a big one. Radiation. Yeah, radiation protection. Radiation without an atmosphere, and this doesn't have an iron nickel core like we have. So this is getting bombarded. Mars, okay, this is Mars, and the moon get bombarded with radiation, and a thin little metal canister is not going to stop much of it in the long term. So if you want to be able to stay in long periods of time on a planet's surface, you're going to need to have added radiation protection. So the idea is to do that somehow. And so the idea of just having an open canopy or glass greenhouses is probably not rational and reasonable. So the idea then is that how do we bring light from the outside, obviously blocked, into the plants? We can bring it through photovoltaic cells, we can take the light and create electricity and use the most efficient electrical lighting that we can. We can also have light tubes that would be able to bring the light in directly and find a way to mitigate the radiation on that. But we're kind of limited, and that ends up being one of the major costs. That's a giant cost of how do we get light into the system. And so finding ways to make them very efficient, looking at photosynthetic pathways that are very efficient on particular wavelengths of light, and then supplying only that wavelength of light. The blues and the reds tend to be sufficient. You can put them at different times. It turns out different wavelengths are important at different phases in a plant's cycle, in its growth cycle. As well as how much light it needs at any particular time in its life cycle. So there's lots of different things that plant physiologists are looking at, understanding that out here on Earth we don't have any control over, so people didn't really look at it very much. But once you start to do this, you start to go, oh, okay. So in a lot of this knowledge can be brought into the greenhouse industry, or there are now ideas of vertical farming. I don't know if anybody's heard of vertical farming, but actually creating very large structures in urban areas where you bring a lot of these technologies, the same technologies, into growing plants in buildings. These can be multi-use buildings where you grow plants on the southern, sort of the southeast to the southwest side of the building, and then living structures or commerce or whatever on the other side. And to use the sun that comes in, and in other words, to use an awful lot of what we do in space to create regenerative food production systems on Earth in cities. Those are just starting to crop up. We'll see how they, no pun intended. We'll see what happens with those, but we're starting to look at that, and we're actually quite interested. So this is, does anybody know what this is? Biosphere 2, yeah. So this was an experiment, a privately run experiment. This was not NASA or associated with the government. This was a privately run experiment to see if you could create a closed system. This is in Arizona. And completely block off the air, the water, and run a completely closed system. It turns out, even though they had many, many acres under glass and brought in tens of thousands of species into the system, it wasn't able to maintain itself in the long term. They actually had people inside growing the plants and living off of those plants. There were various issues associated with oxygen getting caught up into the concrete, but overall it ended up being quite difficult to do with this many acres with plenty of sunlight. Okay, they had major biomes. They had a savanna. They had animals. They had everything inside there, and still it was difficult. So doing this in a much, much smaller can and keeping it going is also going to be a large challenge, and something that we'll have to actually overcome before we move out. So in this last several slides I have, I want to talk about some of the Earth-based applications that I've been alluding to throughout this. So regenerative life support systems have had some spin-offs, and we're looking to try to integrate, and actually at Ames we've had some activity. Actually, we've been trying to have a lot of activity of trying to introduce how NASA technologies could be used on Earth for green application, as well as looking at how current green applications could be incorporated into NASA technologies for long-duration missions. So some of the stuff that we've been looking at for a long time is just now becoming an issue, is carbon dioxide capture, so global warming. So capture, conversion, and carbon sequestration. We do an awful lot of air contaminant control. We need to keep the air very clean. We can do that quite well, and that can be a building technology. Taking wastewater. Did you have a question?
Yeah, but maybe more relevant when you finish.
Okay. Taking wastewater and treating it to drinkable standards. So this is the equivalent of going to a sewage treatment plant and putting a faucet at the end of it that you go drink. Okay, so it's not a really attractive concept, but to be honest, on Earth right now, with the way the fresh water is going, more and more systems are moving in this direction. So soon, we're going to be doing this here on Earth. Enhance agricultural productivity, waste minimization and co-product generation. So how to use, right now we have landfills. We take everything we don't want and we throw it in a landfill. What if we made systems that actually created systems that it didn't produce a waste, it produced a feedstock for some other resource generation. So you can't completely necessarily get away from landfills, but imagine most of it being gone. We do alternative energy production, many different ways we look at. And as a matter of fact, an interesting story back in the 70s when most of you weren't born. We had an energy crisis here, and NASA at Glenn Research Center, which was Lewis at the time, actually was charged by the government to look at developing alternative energy systems. And so they became, they had 2,500 people working at NASA looking at how to make alternative energy systems for general production. It became so big at some point the government wanted to break them off and say, you're going to become the DOE, and NASA said, no, don't do that. So that ended up getting stopped. But there's a lot of the solar technologies, a lot of the wind technologies, a lot of it had a basis in the NASA genesis. We have done an awful lot with advanced environmental sensing and control. We've talked with people. I've worked actually with the military looking at how to make more sustainable base camps. They move in lots of people to various theaters, and if they bring in a lot of materials and just moving water around, just to get an idea, just tanking water around in Iraq is a large source of casualties because you have people on the road. So finding ways to recycle water, and so that when efforts are done, that you didn't leave a mess behind. So there's an awful lot going on there as well. Looking at how our systems help green buildings and urban planning. So there's both life support and urban or satellite communications. We were at workshops where we've been looking at urban planning. And something I want to end on, which is systems engineering for large-scale systems. So I showed you that spaghetti diagram, and I just want to bring home the concept of mission planning. So imagine that we are designing a mission and we're going to go to Mars. Okay? So we have a very defined mission. We're going to go to Mars. We're going to go there for a certain amount of time. These are our objectives when we get there. We're going to come back or we're going to stay. Very planned. So as I go through the steps, think about what that might look like if we were trying to do that also here for Earth, something that we haven't really done very methodically here. First is the mission definition. If you don't know what your mission is, you can imagine it's very difficult to achieve it. So right now, when you look at our population and the way it's going up, if an outsider were to come to Earth and say, what is your mission? Well, you could look at that and say, well, it seems like to increase the population as fast as possible. Is that really our mission? Or what is our mission here? And I think it'd be interesting to get some better definition on what that is. Then once you know what your definition is, your mission is, you can have develop requirements, what that is. So this is our document for life support systems, a requirement document. It's not very thick. It's only about that thick. And they're very top-level documents. They don't tell you how to achieve it. They only tell you this is what we need. We need this much oxygen. We need it to be this pressure. We need this much nitrogen. They don't tell you how to do it. They just say, please keep the atmosphere this way. We don't have that for the Earth at this point in time. We don't have this, the knowledge necessary, although it's starting to develop an Earth life support systems document. But this is inevitable. This is happening now, and this is going to get more and more defined. It's going to be an international effort where people are going to start to understand what the acceptable CO2 levels are, what acceptable concentrations of various contaminants all around the world are going to be. So this is a very interesting time period. We are in that flux right now. We are towards the edge of that curve where And you know, if you think about it, the more people you squeeze into any living system, the more it becomes like a space capsule. You know, if we had to close these doors off, you would be instantly, wow, this is very crowded if you try to live here a long time. The more people we bring into our systems, the more it becomes, the buffers become smaller, and actually the systems that we use for our life support systems start to interfere and impair the other life support systems. One thing I forgot to mention, when I showed you the ecosystem services slide, there was a Millennium Ecosystems assessment done in 2000, and it examined 24 different Earth ecosystems services, and 15 of the 24 are in significant decline. So in other words, more than half of our ecosystem services and what they provide are in a state of decline, and there's a lack of understanding what that means. And some of them, it's not linear. Some systems go down slowly, some hit a point and then drop off. And if you take any one of those systems and defunctionalize it, it's very unclear what that's going to mean in the global sense. Once we have our requirements, then we can start looking at the design. Again, coming down to how do we put these systems together? So are we thinking about how we put all of our human life support systems together? Remember the slide where all the things came in together? Are we looking, you know, here at NASA, we know how to do that. We can put these systems together. It's command and control. How would we do that for Earth? It's an interesting question. Then once we do that, we also need to look at the risks associated with how we do it. So, and NASA tests everything to the nth degree. But again, looking at these systems, we can find out if this system were here were to fail or to start operating at this performance level, how would it trickle down into the rest of the system? We have a very limited understanding of how our ecosystem services are affecting each other by a little bit of dwindling here, a little bit of dwindling there. I think we need to understand that quite a bit more. If we look at the actual operations, so monitoring, here's Gene Kranz, who failure is not an option guy long before your time, brought Apollo 13 through its, well, most of the Apollo missions. Here's a monitoring station. This is just for shuttle. So we have a lot of people and a lot of monitoring going on for 6 people in a small can. You know, imagine what it would take to create these monitoring systems around the Earth so that we could create a deep understanding of what's happening on the Earth, maybe not real time, but close to real time. And being able to develop that and get those kind of Earth dashboards out to people. And so you can bring up your dashboard, your Google dashboard, and there's, you know, you're understanding what's happening with your life support systems. And there's a clear feedback that this is happening. That's a big job, and there's a lot of people, NASA and many other people included, working on that. Maintenance of these life support systems. Here we see in the shuttle, crew changing out carbon dioxide canisters. So they know, all right, this is how our carbon dioxide is absorbed, and now this is what we need to do to maintain the system. Do we know what's going on here? Also, there's maintenance, then there's repair. Things do go wrong. Carbon, this is from Apollo 13. Anybody see the movie? Okay, good, okay. So you know that they had a problem with their carbon dioxide in the system, and it started to build up a little bit in the system. Interesting. They were able to fix it with some duct tape and some canisters, and get back and save the mission. If only it were that simple, for us. But understanding, our systems and how to repair them is going to be quite interesting. This Hubble repair was the first one where it was quite interesting. They spent a lot of money and they developed this really beautiful telescope, and there was one slight systems engineering issue associated with the grinding of the lens of the mirror. And it was ever so slightly off, and it made it so when they took the first picture, it looked fuzzy. And everybody who worked so hard was like, oh man. But what they were able to do, because they knew the system well, they were able to go up and create a different small lens and rectify the problem. And now I'm sure you've seen many of the Hubble pictures throughout time. So I like Hubble because it got repaired. I thought it's interesting that it didn't just go up and work, but they actually, Story Musgrove, who I heard speak about how he was repairing that, quite an interesting mission. And the idea of what kind of repair we need down here. How do we approach that? So I would suggest looking at the ecosystems and trying to repair them first. Okay. So here's a concept. So New York City, Manhattan, the drinking water quality was starting to degrade. New York City has been known for a long time to have fantastic water. I never believed that. I went there and I tasted it, and it was actually quite good. But with time, what happened was that in the upper Hudson Bay, overdevelopment, too many houses discharging into the streams, septic systems, started producing too many nutrients and then caused a lot of problems in the Hudson, which is where they actually got their drinking water from. So the first thought, of course, is what? What are we going to do? We have a drinking water problem. What are we going to do? We're going to build a big water treatment system, because that's what we know, right? So that was proposed. That was $6 to $8 billion. That was going to be that. So somebody else came along and said, well, wait a minute. What if we go and we treat that area up there? And it ended up costing $1.5 billion to treat the problem at its source and to fix the life support system that was going on there, which is the ground and the water systems, the groundwater systems. To actually address that itself was, it fixed that problem and made that area better to live in. It only cost a little bit, and it solved the drinking water problem. It's quite interesting, a different way to think about it. And so that brings us to the end. And I'd like to, I won't say I've been playing with you, but I've been playing a particular role in this, and I want to turn it around a little bit. When we think about Earth life support systems, we can think about it from a human point of view, right? So we're humans, and then there's our Earth life support systems, and they're what's keeping us alive, right? It's a very self-centered way to look at this. But in reality, we are part of the Earth's systems, Earth life support systems. So much like a tree does what it does, a bird does what it does, bacteria does what it does, we do what we do. And the question comes down, and I like to just not try to answer it for you, but what is our role as in working with the life support systems? What is our overall Earth life support system role here? And it's quite an interesting thing to contemplate. How do we build our systems so that we support the other systems instead of thinking of them as resources we can deplete? It's a very different way of looking at it, and there's a lot of interesting reading and thoughts coming this way. And I'll leave you with the secrets of the astronauts, of what they can tell us and what you've been hearing. Number one, they know what their life support systems are. We don't. Every astronaut knows this. They know what their life support systems do. We don't fully. They know how theirs work. We don't know how ours work. They know how to monitor their systems. They know how to maintain their systems, and they know how to repair their systems. So this is something every crew member knows before they go up there. You're not going to go up there and not know your life support system. But what they absolutely know, and I've talked with many different astronauts, and it's quite interesting how moved they are when they go up to space and they look down at Earth. They know that they're completely dependent in that little can on their life support systems. And they know that they can't stay there. They have to come back down here. And so they begin to understand how important this place is, because this is the only place we have. This is the only large life support system that can actually do all the things that need to happen. So it's interesting what their baseline education is. They do not go up there without understanding what a life support system and what it does and knowing everything. And they would certainly never mess with it. They wouldn't say, hey, why don't we just reduce the performance of this about 25%? So I think that kind of spirit would be interesting to bring into educational systems. And I'll leave us where we started, and I want to re-ask the question: who here works with life support systems? Only you? Rest of the people don't? Well, it's amazing. It's amazing. You know, when you talk about human life support systems, I don't think that there's much going on here that isn't part of it. And having, you know, a larger perspective of these systems are augmenting the larger systems. And these are the systems that we are going to need to carry with us to leave. I mean, so again, we heard the sun's going to blow someday, right? And you know, we might still be here, we might not. Where will we be? You know, and wherever we are, well, I'm sure we'll be having, we'll have our life support systems. That's the one thing that I know, is that we won't be someplace without our life support systems. So anyway, I'll end and I'll get off the soapbox, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions. I know it's a few minutes after. Don't want to keep you if you're hungry.
But isn't dinner part of the life support system?
Yes, absolutely.
That you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's an interesting exercise to think as you go through the rest of the day. Every breath you take, you know, the gravity is part of the life support system that the earth provides for us, the food. Every time you use the bathroom, it probably goes on and on and on.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.